Dad, she's lying about everything, isn't she? My son Lucas whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he watched the woman sitting across the dining room table. 10 years. 10 years since Miranda had abandoned our 6-year-old son at my doorstep, claiming she couldn't handle his tantrums. And now here she was, with an expensive lawyer and a briefcase full of documents that supposedly proved her constant presence in Lucas's life. Mr. Thompson, her lawyer, a man in an impeccable suit, slid the papers across the table. My client has been present throughout Lucas's childhood. This is evidence of visitation, regularly paid child support, and active participation in his education. I looked at the documents without touching them. Bank transfer receipts dated from 2014 to 2024. School reports signed by Miranda. Photographs of her with Lucas at various ages. Everything looked official, stamped, authenticated. My name is Gabriel Thompson, but everyone calls me Gab. I'm 52 years old and work as a security systems technician in Detroit. For the past 10 years, I've raised my son alone after my ex-wife decided that epilepsy was too much of a defect for her to handle. At the time, Lucas was only 6 when the first seizures began. Small absences at first, he would just stop talking mid-sentence and stare into space for a few seconds. Miranda was terrified. This isn't normal, Gab. There's something wrong with him. Then came the bigger seizures. Lucas would fall, his little body convulsing on the kitchen floor while I held his head and timed the seconds that seemed like an eternity. Miranda watched from the corner of the room, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and disgust that sent a chill down my spine. I can't do this, she said on a rainy Thursday in March. Gab, I tried, but I can't be the mother of a special child. Special. As if epilepsy were a death sentence rather than a treatable medical condition. The next morning, I found Lucas alone on the porch, his small backpack at his feet, still wearing his Spider-Man pajamas. Miranda had left a note on the refrigerator, "He's better off with you. I'm not cut out for this." For years, Lucas would ask when his mom would come back. I explained that some people don't know how to love unconditionally, but that didn't mean he wasn't worthy of love. Gradually, he stopped asking. And now, 10 years later, Miranda was back. Not for love. Not because she missed her son. She came back because Lucas, at 16, had developed a medical monitoring app that he sold to a tech startup for $2.8 million. The story had appeared in the Detroit Free Press. Teenager with epilepsy creates revolutionary app. Miranda saw the article. Everyone saw it. As you can see, the lawyer continued, there is substantial evidence that Ms. Thompson maintained consistent contact and provided significant financial support during Lucas's upbringing. Lucas looked at me with that calm expression I knew so well. The same expression he had before a seizure, when he could feel the electrical storm forming in his brain. But this time, it wasn't a seizure that was coming. "Let her speak, Dad," he whispered softly, just to me. I studied my son's face. 16 years old, tall for his age, with the bright green eyes of the intelligence he had always displayed. The seizures had become rare with the right medication, but they never disappeared completely. Miranda didn't know that. She knew nothing about who Lucas had become. "Gab," Miranda said for the first time since she arrived, her voice sweetened with a familiarity she no longer deserved to use. "I know our separation was difficult, but I've always been there for Lucas. I've always supported you financially." Lie. Every word a documented, stamped lie. But as he watched Miranda elaborate her carefully constructed charade, a small smile crossed Lucas's lips. Very subtle. Almost imperceptible. It was the same smile he had when he finished coding his app. The smile of someone who had just solved a complex problem. If you're following this story of family betrayal and want to know how a father and son can defend themselves together against elaborate lies, subscribe to the channel because what happened next changed everything. Because Miranda had no idea what Lucas had been secretly documenting over the past few years. And when she found out, it would be too late for any lawyer to save her. "I always supported you financially," Miranda repeated, her voice gaining confidence as the lawyer organized more documents on the table. "Gab, you know I sent money every month. $500 a month, religiously. $500. I almost laughed at the irony. In the first few years after she left, I was making only $1,200 a month repairing alarm systems for small businesses. $500 would have meant food on the table, medicine for Lucas's seizures, maybe even decent health insurance. But there was no $500. There wasn't a penny. "Dad," Lucas whispered, lightly touching my arm. "Can I see the documents?" Miranda leaned forward, beaming. "Of course, honey. You can see how Mommy always took care of you." Mommy. The word came out of her mouth as if it were natural, as if she had earned the right to use it. As if 10 years of total absence could be erased by a folder of forged papers. I watched Lucas examine the documents with that intense concentration I knew so well. It was the same expression he had when he was coding, when every line of programming had to be perfect. His eyes moved quickly across the pages, absorbing information, cataloging inconsistencies. "Interesting," he murmured softly. Miranda smiled more broadly. "Your son is very smart, Gab. He clearly inherited that from me." This time, I actually laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Do you remember the last crisis you witnessed, Miranda?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Gab, we don't need to reconnect with past emotions." "It was a Tuesday morning," I continued, ignoring her protests. Lucas was eating cereal in the kitchen when it started. First that distant look, then the stiffness. He fell off his chair and hit his head on the corner of the table. Miranda was visibly uncomfortable now, fiddling with the strap of the expensive bag she was carrying. Blood trickled down his forehead as his body convulsed on the cold kitchen floor. "Do you know what you did, Miranda? You yelled at me to do something, and then ran to the bedroom because you couldn't handle the sight." "That was a long time ago, Gab. People change. Changed so much that you didn't call once in 10 years to find out if your son was alive or dead?" Her lawyer interrupted, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. "Mr. Thompson, my client has been present in many ways. It's not always possible to maintain direct physical contact, but financial support demonstrates consistent parental commitment." I looked at the man in the expensive suit, wondering how much Miranda was paying him to represent this charade. "Financial support? You mean the $500 a month she claims to have sent?" "Exactly. Documented and verified." "Then can you explain to me how we managed to survive when I was unemployed for 3 months in 2015? When I had to sell my car to pay for Lucas's medication? When we ate instant noodles for 2 weeks straight because we couldn't afford anything else?" Silence filled the room. Miranda avoided my gaze, pretending to study her perfectly manicured nails. "If there was $500 coming in every month," I continued, "why did I have to take out loans from loan sharks to pay for emergency surgery when Lucas broke his arm during a seizure?" "Maybe there was a problem with the transfers," the lawyer began, but his voice sounded less confident. "Or maybe," Lucas said softly, still examining the papers, "those transfers never existed." Miranda turned to him with that forced smile. "Lucas, dear, you were too young to understand financial complexities. Adults sometimes use different methods to—" "Mom," Lucas interrupted her, using the word with a coldness that made me shiver. "Can I ask you a question about these dates?" She nodded eagerly, clearly hoping for an opportunity to validate her lies. "This receipt here says you sent $500 on September 15, 2017. Do you remember that day specifically?" "Well, not exactly, but—" "Because I remember it perfectly. It was my 13th birthday." Lucas's voice remained calm, but there was something dangerous in his tone. "Dad made a chocolate cake using a box mix we bought with coupons. We watched old movies on television because we didn't have Netflix." Miranda blinked rapidly. "Honey, I wish I could have been there, but—" "And this other receipt, December 22, 2018. Christmas Eve. According to your records, you sent $500 that day." "Yes, I always sent a little extra for Christmas." "Strange," Lucas continued, his voice maintaining that unsettling calm. "Because on that specific day, I was in the hospital. I had had a severe seizure at school and hit my head. Dad spent the whole night in the chair next to my bed, wearing the same work clothes because he didn't have time to go home and change." I watched the color drain from Miranda's face. "If you really sent $500 that day," Lucas asked, tilting his head slightly, "why did my dad have to use his credit card to pay the health insurance deductible? Why did the nurse bring free sandwiches from the cafeteria because my dad didn't have money for dinner?" The lawyer began frantically shuffling through other papers. "Lucas," Miranda said, her voice trembling slightly, Maybe you're confusing the dates. I don't confuse dates, my son replied simply. I never confuse dates. And it was true. One of Lucas's most striking characteristics was his eidetic memory for chronologies. He could remember not only specific events, but also seemingly insignificant details. What clothes he was wearing, what the weather was like, what song was playing on the radio. It was a skill he had developed as a defense mechanism after the seizures began. When you can't completely trust your own brain, you obsessively document everything around you. Actually, Lucas continued, closing the folder of documents, there's something fascinating about these receipts. Want to know what it is? Miranda and her lawyer waited in tense silence. They're very well done. Professional. Someone spent a lot of time and money creating convincing documents. He paused, his eyes meeting mine briefly. Too bad they're completely fake. The bomb had been dropped. Miranda turned pale, the lawyer began to sweat visibly, and I felt a mixture of pride and anticipation coursing through my veins. My son was only 16, but he was about to teach the mother who abandoned him a lesson she would never forget. And he was just getting started. Fake. Miranda managed to repeat, her voice rising an octave. Lucas, dear, you're confused. These documents were prepared by my personal accountant. Mom, Lucas interrupted her again, this time with a tone that sent a chill down my spine. It was the same calm voice he used during his seizures, when he could feel one coming on and tried to warn me before losing consciousness. Can I show you exactly how I know they're fake? The lawyer leaned forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Young man, serious accusations require serious evidence. Do you have any actual proof of your allegations? Lucas smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, it was the expression of someone who had waited years for this specific question. Actually, I do. He pulled his laptop out of his school backpack, which was on the floor next to his chair. Dad, do you mind if I show our visitors what I've been doing for the past 10 years? I watched my son open the computer with precise, deliberate movements. All these years, I knew Lucas was meticulous. I knew he obsessively documented his daily routine, his medications, his seizures, everything. I thought it was a way of coping with the anxiety caused by his epilepsy. Now I realized it had been much more than that. This is my personal documentation system, Lucas explained, turning the screen so Miranda and the lawyer could see it. I started when I was 7, after my second teacher, Mrs. Martinez, suggested that keeping a journal might help me process my mother's absence. The screen showed a complex interface, divided into sections: calendars, photographs, scanned documents, audio recordings, even graphs and spreadsheets. 7 years. Miranda stammered. Lucas, that's too obsessive. It's necessary, he corrected gently. When you have epilepsy, you need to track patterns. When your mother disappears without explanation, you need to document reality so you don't start questioning your own memories. He clicked on a folder labeled Maternal Absence Evidence. For example, Lucas continued, you said you sent $500 on September 15, 2017. Here's a photo I took that day. The image appeared on the screen, me, clearly younger and visibly exhausted, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills. My head was in my hands, and there was a stack of red envelopes, collection notices, scattered in front of me. I can see the date and time on the digital camera Dad gave me that birthday. I can also see the overdue bills on the table. Rent, electricity, phone. Lucas paused, his eyes meeting Miranda's. If you had actually sent $500 that day, my father wouldn't be sitting there with that look on his face, surrounded by eviction notices. The silence in the room was deafening. Or this one, he continued, clicking on another file. December 22, 2018. You said you sent extra money for Christmas. This time, the image showed a hospital room. I was sleeping in an uncomfortable chair next to a bed where Lucas, clearly younger, was connected to several monitors. There was a half-eaten sandwich on a hospital tray next to my chair. This was after my severe seizure at school. I fell and hit my head on the concrete during recess. Dad spent 3 days in the hospital with me because the doctors wanted to watch for possible signs of head trauma. Miranda was visibly pale now, but Lucas wasn't finished. The night nurse, Jamie, always brought extra sandwiches from the cafeteria because she knew Dad didn't have money to eat. She also let Dad use the phone at the front desk for free to call work and explain why he couldn't come in. He turned the laptop slightly, showing more photographs, me sleeping in hospital chairs, eating vending machine food, wearing the same clothes for days on end. "If you had actually sent that extra $500 that Christmas," Lucas said, his voice maintaining that unsettling calm, "my dad wouldn't have had to choose between gas to get to work and food to eat during the 3 days he spent in the hospital with me." The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "Lucas, photographs can be manipulated, especially with modern technology." "You can check the metadata," Lucas offered immediately. "I also have the corresponding audio recordings, hospital medical records confirming the exact dates, and," he paused, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I have something you definitely didn't expect." He clicked on a new folder. Phone recordings. Miranda turned white as a sheet. "You see, when you abandoned Dad and me, he was devastated. He really believed you would come back. So he kept the same phone number for years, waiting for you to call. And when he finally realized you weren't coming back, he was afraid to change the number because he thought that maybe, just maybe, you would want to talk to me." Lucas clicked play. Miranda's voice, clearly younger, came out of the laptop speakers. "Gab, I can't do this anymore. That boy, he's not normal. These crises, the doctors, the medication. I'm not cut out for this. You can raise him on your own, you're better at it anyway." It was the call. The last call Miranda had made on December 24, 2010. 10 years of absolute silence. "Interesting," Lucas commented, pausing the recording. "Your last call was to say you were leaving me because I wasn't normal. But now your records show regular emotional support calls throughout all these years." Miranda was visibly shaking. "Lucas, you don't understand the context." "I understand the context perfectly." For the first time, there was a slight irritation in Lucas's voice. "The context is that you abandoned me when you found out I had epilepsy. And now, 10 years later, you want to pretend you were a present mother because you found out I have money." He closed the laptop with a definitive click. "But what you really don't understand," Lucas continued, looking directly at Miranda, "is that I didn't just document your absence. I also documented my father's presence." It hit me like a punch in the stomach. All these years, while I was worrying about whether I was being a good father, whether I was doing enough, Lucas had been documenting everything. I have photos of him waking up at 3 in the morning when I had nighttime seizures. Recordings of him calling doctors, researching treatments, learning about epilepsy because you ran away instead of learning. I have documentation of every doctor's appointment he paid for himself, every medication he bought with borrowed money, every night he slept on the floor of my room because I was afraid. Lucas's voice was getting stronger, more determined. "So when you show up here with fake papers trying to claim part of the money I earned by creating something useful, something that can help other families like ours," he paused, taking a deep breath, "you're not just lying about the past. You're insulting the man who actually raised me." That was when I made my decision. For 10 years, I had protected Lucas from everything I could. I couldn't protect him from his seizures, but from everything else: financial difficulties, worries about his future, my own exhaustion. I had protected him. But Lucas was no longer a 6-year-old child frightened by seizures he didn't understand. He was a 16-year-old who had created revolutionary technology and apparently had been protecting me too, in his own quiet way. "Miranda," I said finally, my voice coming out firmer than I felt, "you can stop this charade now." She turned to me, desperate hope in her eyes. "Gab, you can't really believe I would fabricate." "I was there," I cut her off. "I was there when you packed your bags. I was there when you said you couldn't handle the situation. I was there every night for 10 years when Lucas screamed mommy during postictal nightmares and I had to explain once again why you weren't there." I rose from my chair, feeling decades of anger finally finding its voice. "So don't insult my intelligence or Lucas's by pretending these documents are real. And definitely don't insult the 10 years we spent building a real family without you." The lawyer was closing his briefcase, clearly realizing the case was lost. "Gab," Miranda tried one last time, "I was young, I was scared." "You were 28, Lucas said softly. "The same age Dad was when he decided to stay and learn how to take care of me." Miranda looked around the room like a cornered animal. That's when I realized, she really believed she could come back, fabricate a story, and claim the right to the success of the son she abandoned. The arrogance was impressive. But Lucas was just beginning to show how impressive his preparation for this moment was. "Actually, Mom," he said, picking up his cell phone, "there's something else you should know about my documentation." What Lucas revealed next would change everything we thought we knew about our little family reunion. And when Miranda discovered the full extent of what my son had been preparing, it would be too late for any retreat strategy. "Actually, Mom," Lucas continued, his fingers sliding across the phone screen with the precision of a surgeon, "you should know that my documentation goes far beyond proving your absence." Miranda and the lawyer exchanged nervous glances. For the first time since they arrived, I realized they were beginning to understand that they weren't dealing with an ordinary teenager they could intimidate with legal paperwork. "What do you mean by that?" the lawyer asked, his voice losing some of its previous confidence. Lucas smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but there was something cold about it that made my heart race. "Well, when you abandon a child with epilepsy, you leave traces. Not just of your absence, but also of the consequences of that absence. And over the course of 10 years, those traces accumulate." He turned the phone around, showing a new screen. "For example, did you know that there are detailed medical records of every seizure I've had? Every hospital visit, every medication change, every side effect I've experienced?" Miranda was visibly uncomfortable. "Lucas, that's irrelevant too." "It's very relevant," he interrupted her gently. "Because those medical records include notes about my emotional state. Childhood depression caused by parental abandonment. Severe anxiety related to abandonment issues. All documented by licensed professionals." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Lucas, medical records are confidential." "They're my records," Lucas replied simply. "I can share them with whomever I want. And there are some very interesting details." He swiped to a new section of the app. "You see, when a child with epilepsy is abandoned by a parent, there are specific protocols that doctors must follow. Mandatory reports to social services. Psychological evaluations. Documentation of trauma." Miranda turned pale. "You didn't." "I kept everything. Every report, every evaluation, every medical recommendation that included the need for family therapy. Therapy we never received because you weren't available to participate." Lucas paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But that's just the beginning. You see, over the past 2 years, while developing my app, I also worked on another project. A personal project." My stomach tightened. During those 2 years, Lucas spent extra hours on the computer after finishing his homework. He always said he was perfecting code or testing new features. I never imagined there was anything else. "What kind of project?" I asked, my curiosity mixed with concern. "Genealogical and social research," Lucas replied, his eyes meeting mine briefly before turning back to Miranda. "When you have epilepsy, doctors always ask about family history. Especially on the maternal side. So I started researching." The lawyer was now visibly nervous, shuffling his papers. "Lucas, where are you going with this?" "I'm getting to the fact that I've discovered interesting things about my mother's life over the last 10 years. Things she apparently didn't mention in her forged documents." Miranda stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're a child. You can't have access to." "Yes, I can," Lucas said calmly. "Especially when people share their entire lives on social media. And when you know where to look for public records." He showed us his phone screen. It was a detailed timeline, with photographs, documents, and screenshots organized chronologically. "For example," Lucas continued, "in July 2013, you posted photos from your summer vacation in Cancun. 3 weeks in Mexico. Interestingly, those are the same 3 weeks when, according to your forged documents, you were here in Detroit taking care of me during a supposed hospital stay." The silence in the room was deafening. "Or December 2015, he continued, sliding to another section. "Your Facebook posts show you celebrating New Year's Eve in Las Vegas. There are even photos of you in casinos, clearly dated. But your falsified documents claim that you were here, helping with my severe epileptic crisis during that period." Miranda was now visibly shaking. "Lucas, you don't understand the context." "I understand the context perfectly. The context is that you lied. Systematically. And you left electronic traces of every lie. Lucas turned to me. Dad, do you remember December 2015? I remembered. How could I forget? You had a severe seizure on New Year's Eve. We spent 3 days in the hospital because the doctors were concerned about possible status epilepticus. Exactly. And while Dad slept in uncomfortable chairs in the hospital, paying every penny of the treatment out of his own pocket, our mother was gambling on slot machines in Nevada. For the first time, I saw something that wasn't calculated in Lucas's expression. It was anger. Pure, justified anger. But the really interesting part, he continued, regaining his composure, is that I didn't stop there. You've only seen a small sample of what I've documented. The lawyer was now visibly sweating. Lucas, maybe we should. Maybe we should continue, Lucas interrupted him. Because there's something you really need to know before you proceed with this charade. He paused, his eyes fixed directly on Miranda. 3 days ago, when I saw the news about you hiring a lawyer to contest my legal emancipation and claim rights to my earnings, I did something you didn't expect. My blood ran cold. Lucas, what did you do? I did what any rational person would do when confronted with documented fraud and attempted family extortion, he replied calmly. I contacted the state of Michigan, Department of Human Services, Division of Child Protection. Miranda fell back into her chair as if she had been punched. I provided them with complete documentation of parental abandonment, medical negligence, and now attempted fraud to gain access to a minor's assets. I also provided evidence that you falsified legal documents in an attempt to deceive the judicial system. The lawyer was now pale. Lucas, you can't just. I already have. And they are very interested in the case. Especially because, Lucas paused, allowing the tension to build, they discovered that this isn't your first case involving questionable documentation. Miranda made a strangled sound. What do you mean? Background investigations are fascinating, Mom. Especially when you know how to access public records and cross-reference. Apparently, you've had some misunderstandings related to insurance and benefit claims in recent years. If you're following this shocking twist and want to find out how far a 16-year-old can go to protect his family, subscribe to the channel because Lucas was just beginning to reveal the true extent of his preparation. The lawyer was now frantically gathering his papers. Miranda, we need to talk. Now. But Lucas wasn't finished. Actually, he said, his voice maintaining that unsettling calm, there's something else you should know before you rush off. We all looked at him, waiting. The Department of Human Services wasn't the only agency I contacted. Miranda was now breathing shallowly, as if she were having a panic attack. You see, when you falsify documents to commit fraud against a minor, especially a minor with a documented medical disability, it becomes a federal crime. So I also contacted the FBI. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heart beating, the ticking of the wall clock, even the distant hum of the refrigerator. And they're very interested in talking to both of you. That's when I realized, my son wasn't just smart. He had become strategic. For years, while I was busy protecting him from the world, he had been meticulously documenting his own protection. And now, Miranda and her lawyer were about to discover that trying to defraud a teenager with epilepsy who had spent the last decade creating documentation and verification systems was possibly the worst decision they could have made. Because Lucas wasn't just defending our past. He was securing our future. And when you mess with the future of someone who can code, investigate, and document better than most adults, you quickly discover that you have completely underestimated your opponent. The FBI. Miranda whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Lucas, you can't be serious. Agent Rebecca Morrison, White Collar Crime Division, Lucas replied calmly, taking a business card from his shirt pocket. She became particularly interested when I mentioned that you used forged documents to try to access funds from a disabled minor. The lawyer was now visibly sweating, his hands shaking as he frantically gathered the papers scattered across the table. Miranda, we need to leave. Now. Mr. Walsh, Lucas said, his voice maintaining that unsettling calm, before you rush off, there's something else you should know. Walsh stopped in mid-motion, as if frozen. You see, when I started investigating my mother's background, I discovered something fascinating. This isn't her first case involving questionable documentation. And it's definitely not your first case. Miranda made a strangled sound. Lucas, stop this. In fact, you two have quite an interesting history together. 3 similar cases in the last 5 years. Always the same pattern. Female client claiming rights to property or benefits from family members, always with documentation that later turned out to be problematic. Walsh was now completely pale. That's inadmissible as evidence. It's inadmissible in court, Lucas agreed. But it's not inadmissible in a federal investigation. Especially when you provide that information voluntarily, as I did. I watched my son with a mixture of pride and utter shock. For 16 years, I thought I was protecting Lucas from the world. Now I realized he had been protecting both of us in ways I could never have imagined. Agent Morrison was particularly interested in the case from June 2022, Lucas continued, his fingers sliding across the phone. An 83-year-old woman named Dorothy Chun. Do you remember Mrs. Chun? The silence in the room was absolute. Her children put her in a nursing home after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. A few months later, a woman showed up claiming to be her long-lost granddaughter, with documents proving that Dorothy had promised to leave her the house. Miranda was now breathing rapidly, as if she were having a panic attack. Dorothy's children were confused because they didn't know of any long-lost granddaughter. But the documents looked legitimate. Signed, authenticated, even with photographs of the alleged granddaughter visiting Dorothy over the years. Lucas paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Of course, they later discovered that all the photographs had been digitally manipulated. The signatures were forged. And the lost granddaughter disappeared with $68,000 from the sale of the house before anyone could legally question it. Walsh was now manically gathering his papers. Miranda, we're leaving. Now. The interesting part, Lucas continued, completely ignoring the lawyer's agitation, is that I discovered at least 3 other similar cases. Always the same lawyer. Always the same pattern of falsified documentation. Always targeting vulnerable victims, elderly people with dementia, grieving families, people who don't have the resources to fight back. Miranda stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward with a crash. Enough. Lucas, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, he replied, his voice finally showing a hint of emotion. I'm stopping you from doing to other families what you tried to do to us. That's when I realized, Lucas wasn't just defending himself. He was protecting other people like us. Vulnerable people who could be targeted by scammers like Miranda and Walsh. Agent Morrison said something interesting when we talked yesterday, Lucas continued. She said that cases like these are rarely isolated events. Fraudsters almost always have a pattern, a method they repeat because it works. Walsh was now at the door, clearly desperate to leave. Miranda. And she was right, Lucas said, turning his phone to show more files. You have a very clear pattern. You always target families with limited resources. You always use emotional vulnerabilities, abandonment, death in the family, disabilities. And you always bet that your victims won't have the knowledge or resources to fight back properly. Miranda was now visibly shaking. Lucas, I'm your mother. No, he said simply. You're a stranger who shares half my DNA. A mother is someone who stays when things get tough. A mother is someone who learns about epilepsy instead of running away from it. A mother is someone who doesn't abandon her child and then come back 10 years later trying to steal the money he earned. For the first time since Miranda arrived, I saw tears in Lucas's eyes. Not from sadness, but from a righteous anger that had been held back for years. Do you want to know what your fatal mistake was? He asked, his voice regaining its calm. You underestimated not only my intelligence, but also my dedication to justice. When you abandon a child with epilepsy, that child learns that the world can be unfair and unpredictable. But they also learn to be meticulous, to document everything, to never blindly trust anything. Lucas stood up and walked over to the dining room window. So when that child grows up and develops skills in technology, in research, in data analysis, and then sees their own mother trying to defraud other vulnerable families, well, that child decides that enough is enough. He turned to face Miranda directly. Agent Morrison will be here in exactly, he checked his watch, 23 minutes. You can try to run, but she already has all your known addresses. You can try to deny everything, but I've provided complete digital evidence that proves not only this case, but the 3 previous cases. Walsh was now pulling Miranda by the arm. We need to go. Now. Or, Lucas said calmly, you can stay and face the consequences like adults. Maybe even show some genuine remorse for the families you've harmed. Miranda stopped resisting Walsh's tugging. For a moment, she looked at Lucas with what might have been regret. Lucas, I was desperate. After you became famous, I thought maybe. You thought you could steal money from your own son, he said simply. And when that didn't work on the first try, you decided to try to defraud the legal system with forged documents. Miranda opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The difference between us, Lucas continued, is that when I was desperate, when you abandoned me when Dad lost his job, when we didn't have money for medicine, I found legal and ethical ways to solve the problems. I studied, I worked, I created something useful. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. You chose to steal. It was then that I heard the sound of cars pulling up in front of the house. Lucas smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Ah, he said, checking his watch again, Agent Morrison arrived earlier than expected. Miranda and Walsh looked out the window and saw two black FBI cars parked on the sidewalk. Agents in sober suits were getting out of the vehicles, walking purposefully toward our door. How would you prefer to do this? Lucas asked politely. Do you want to go out to meet them, or would you prefer that I invite them in? The moment of recognition that crossed Miranda's face was devastating. First, the complete understanding that she had been defeated. Then the realization that there was no way out. Finally, the realization that she had been outsmarted by a child she had abandoned because she considered him too defective. And when the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the federal agents, I knew that my son had done more than just get revenge. He had ensured that Miranda and Walsh would never again be able to harm other vulnerable families. The real lesson Miranda was about to learn was that underestimating a child with epilepsy who had spent 10 years documenting injustices was possibly the biggest miscalculation of her entire life. 6 months later, Miranda was sentenced to 18 months in prison for document fraud and attempted family extortion. Walsh lost his license to practice law and faced federal charges for conspiracy in multiple fraud cases. Agent Morrison called me personally to thank Lucas for his cooperation. Your son helped us dismantle an entire fraud network that had been operating for years, she said. Vulnerable families in 3 states were victims of this scheme. Lucas was in the kitchen when I finished the call, preparing our traditional breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, just as we had done 10 years ago. Do you feel avenged? I asked, watching him cut the toast into perfect triangles. He paused, considering the question with his characteristic seriousness. It wasn't about revenge, Dad. It was about protection. Protecting our family and protecting other families like ours. During the trial, we discovered that Miranda and Walsh had defrauded 17 families over the past 5 years. Always the same pattern: target vulnerable people, create false documentation, disappear with the money. The difference, Lucas told me one afternoon, is that the other victims didn't have someone like me documenting everything for 10 years. His data security consulting business grew rapidly. He specialized in helping families protect their assets from fraud, using the same techniques he had developed to defend us. Last week, I received a letter in prison. Miranda wrote asking for forgiveness, saying she finally understood how much she had hurt us. Lucas read the letter, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. Someday I may forgive her, he said. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it definitely doesn't mean trusting again. I watch my son now, at 17, leading a team of security analysts, helping other families protect themselves. Epilepsy is still part of our lives. He still takes medication, still has occasional seizures. But we never again allowed it to define us as vulnerable. You know what I've learned, Dad? Lucas said to me yesterday as he reviewed cases for new clients. People like her bet that families like ours don't know how to defend themselves. They count on our ignorance, our vulnerability, our fear. He smiled, not the calculated smile from the courtroom, but something genuine and determined. But when you teach a different child to document, research, and think strategically, you don't create a victim. You create someone who will never be fooled again. If this story of how a father and son turned abandonment into family protection touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. We have many other stories of people who refused to be victims and found extraordinary ways to create justice. The last time I heard from Miranda, She was doing community service at an organization that supports families with special needs children. Perhaps she is finally learning what it means to care instead of abandon. As for us, we are building something she will never have, a real family, based on presence, not empty promises.